Hey, all right, welcome back, everybody. And last time we were getting ready for the Civil War. This week and into next week, we're going to do the Civil War. We left it, we were about here with the election of Abraham Lincoln. All right, and the new political anti-slavery party, the Republican Party, and if we are going to get, I'll post this to the class page as well. But if we look here, it says free speech, free homes, free territory. Remember, the Republicans' whole thing was about keeping slavery out of the new territories in the West. Even Lincoln himself said they couldn't do much about it in southern states that already had it. And the election of Lincoln. And we looked at this last week that Lincoln wins the election by winning all of the free states, all of the states that had outlawed slavery. And even if you add up all of the slave states on this map, the blue, the yellow, and the green, they won't win. They're not going to win the popular vote. They might have won the popular vote, but they were never going to win the electoral vote. Lincoln wins about 60% of the electoral vote. The South looks at this situation, and they secede from the Union. They say that the Union is dissolved. This from the Charleston, South Carolina Mercury. That they say they're going to go form their own country, the Confederate States of America. And they start with the taking of Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina Harbor. It was a Union fort. Lincoln tries to resupply the fort, and when they shoot at the ships trying to resupply the fort, and that's it. Lincoln essentially tricks the South into firing the first shots of the war, so that now that the North can say, hey, these states are in rebellion, that they fired the first shots. If we look at it, we got to figure out who's on what side. And it would be easy if we said, okay, here's all the slave states versus all of the non-slave states. We see Kansas finally becomes a state. We see West Virginia becomes a state, as West Virginia says, no, we're not seceding with the rest of Virginia. We have a lot more in common with Ohio, and the folks up in the mountains in West Virginia were fairly poor, didn't own a lot of slaves. But it doesn't divide up that easily. It rarely does. In this case, we have these states with the stripes. Those are the states that are going to break away and form their own country. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, what we call border states. On this map, they're green. And these are slave states that decided to stay with the Union, that said there was a way to keep slavery and keep the country together. We know now that was never really going to happen, that this idea of freedom and democracy in America and owning other humans as property just was never going to fit together. And for 90 years, like two pieces of a puzzle that were never going to fit right, Americans tried and failed. And the Civil War is the ultimate example of that failure. The South forms their own government called the Confederate States of America, and they really see themselves as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and those guys forming their own independent country. In fact, on the seal of the Confederate States of America is George Washington of Virginia riding a horse into battle. They really see themselves as that. So we have President Lincoln from the North and President Davis, Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, down in the South. They really see themselves now as this independent nation. But really, we got to look back and say, did the South really have any chance to win? Probably not. Although they come close. Right? If we look at this, and again, you'll get this posted to you, everything, and it works better with the charts. In the blue, we have the North, the Union states. And in the red, we have the southern states. The yellow is the border states. So in almost everything, in how much railroads, how many factories, how many folks worked in those factories, the production of those factories, how much money both sides had to work with, and how many people each side had to work with, even how many horses, the North just greatly outnumbered. They had a much bigger population. They had all of those factories. And in almost all of these, if we ran down the list, population, industrial strength, central government, transportation, navy, almost all of them, I would say 5 of 8 here, the North has a huge advantage. What does the South have an advantage in? Military expertise. Most historians look back and say, really, they got the better generals. Oddly enough, most of the generals in the army had fought up until this point in the same army. Most of them had been fellow officers in the war against Mexico in the 1840s. Many of them went to West Point, right across the river from Peekskill, together, and kind of knew what the other side was going to do all the time because they had all sort of trained together. But the South seemed to have gotten the better of the generals at the beginning of the war, and they're fighting for an independent country. Remember, we said that was such a big motivator for George Washington and the guys in the Revolution. Also, they are fighting a defensive war. The North has to go down there and get the South, get them to give up on this idea of being a separate country, which is a rather difficult task. And in the beginning of the war, things really don't go well for the North. The North had to go down and attack the South. They were going to be far away from their supplies, and things don't go well. The early battles, the North expected a short war and an easy victory. They would go down there and crush these guys, but it doesn't really go that way. Places like Bull Run, and places, we could spend forever on all these battles, where the larger Union force is routed by the South. Lincoln actually goes out to the battlefield, so they're that close to Washington, D.C., and here's a photograph of Lincoln. Here's Lincoln with General McClellan, the first of his leaders in the Civil War. And he's saying, go fight. You have more guys. Go get them. And McClellan's like, nah, my guy, I gotta train my guys. We need more time. We need more men. We need more stuff. And Lincoln is getting very upset with McClellan. McClellan tries to train his army, and Lincoln is saying, we got to go fight. Go get them. And things don't go well. McClellan, with his bigger Union army, has to retreat a number of times. And things are not going well for the North. And some folks in the North start to think, geez, maybe we should just let the South go. We do have the blockade is one of the ways that the North is fighting the South. What they really decide is that they're going to starve the South out. Because the North has a way better navy, what they're able to do is cut off the South, and really imports and exports to the South are cut by 90%. Really, by the end of the war, the South is largely starved. And remember, all of that stuff that they grow in the South, the cotton and the indigo and the tobacco, you can't eat it. You can't survive on that. The only way it's useful is if you can take that and sell it someplace else. Well, if you can't, because there's Union ships stopping your merchant vessels, you can't do anything there. The Civil War is going to see our first matchup of what we call ironclads, metal ships at sea. And we have the Merrimack, renamed the Virginia, and the Monitor from the north. And these two metal ships go out there and they're shooting cannonballs, and clang, the cannonballs are kind of hitting off the sides because they really don't know how else to do it. And after a few hours, an afternoon of these two shooting at each other, the Merrimack, the southern ship, has to withdraw from the scene. So the North calls it a victory, but the North wasn't getting too many victories, and so they were happy to call this one a victory, even though most historians kind of call it a tie. The battle at Antietam, which we're sort of fast forwarding to, Antietam Creek. It is, in many ways, still the bloodiest day in American history. And the numbers from the Civil War are going to be crazy for us. And it's after Antietam that the Emancipation Proclamation is issued. All right, Lincoln was looking. Lincoln said, "I want to issue a proclamation freeing slaves in the South, but I can't do it until I get a win." So it's after the Battle of Antietam, which they call the Union victory. And what Lincoln says is that frees the slaves, but only the slaves living in Confederate states. Only those states still in rebellion as of January 1st, 1863. And the reason he has to do it that way is two things. It's taking this idea of slaves as property and turning it on its head. It's turning it on the South and says, well, okay, you're saying the slaves are property and we can't take away your property, but now the Southerners are using the slaves to dig ditches and to build barricades in this rebellion, in this fight against the North. So just like when the Union Army goes down and takes over an area from the Southern Army, just like we would take away their guns and we would take away their horses so they can't fight anymore, we're going to take away their slaves because they're using the slaves as part of the war effort. So Lincoln is the only reason Lincoln can do this is because it's a war going on. Usually the president can't just snap their fingers and make a law like that. But so the Emancipation Proclamation becomes a big thing because now this war isn't just about slavery. Isn't just about keeping the Union together. Now, ending slavery is officially one of the goals of the war. So what? A lot of folks in the North say, well, wasn't that always one of the goals of the war? Yes and no. There was a lot of folks in the North that said, I'm not going to end slavery. I'm going because we got to keep the country together. And a lot of other folks were saying, that's not why I'm going to send my son off to war with the president. However, making the war about slavery now says no other country is going to come help the South. The South had hoped that maybe Great Britain would get in on the side of the South, help break the blockade. Remember all of that Southern cotton that was being sold to English textile mills, and they were hoping that they could form some sort of alliance with Great Britain. But now that this war is about slavery, nobody is coming to help the South. No other country is going to make to help them fight a war to keep their slaves. And that's really what the Emancipation Proclamation ended up doing. Didn't actually free that many slaves. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution a little later would do that. But really made the war about slavery. And in 1863, around the same time as the Emancipation Proclamation, we do see the Union Army recruiting and outfitting numbers of African American soldiers. In this case, the most famous one from the movie Glory is the 54th Infantry from Massachusetts, who fought valiantly in South Carolina, and it doesn't always go well for the North until we get to Gettysburg. Gettysburg is going to be the turning point of the war in southern Pennsylvania, where the South had actually invaded the North. And that will be our focus. Gettysburg, the battle and the Gettysburg Address will be our focus of discussion on Thursday in our live lesson, when I will see you there. Thanks, and bye.